Welcome to the hidden corners where truth and terror collide. Discover a realm where the lines between the living and the supernatural blur as you embark on a journey to the paranormal and visit the mysterious hidden corners of your mind.
Welcome to the Wolfman Chronicles. This is Chapter 6 of Book 7, which makes it Episode 83. And it's the homecoming. Home never felt so good. Jack exhaled slowly, letting his head fall back against the soft leather sofa. The nightmare of the crash, the desperate fight to stay alive, the frozen wilderness that had nearly swallowed him, was all behind them now. They had survived. And more than that, they had gained something in the process. Family. Rachel looked up, her eyes meeting Jack's. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack managed a small, tired smile. "You don't have to," he said. "Why, you're one of us now." The room fell into a comfortable silence. Rachel sat across from Jack and Sasha in a large cushioned armchair, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of cocoa. She was quiet, still adjusting to the idea that she had a new family now. "We've got the weekend to relax," Jack said, "but Monday we've got to head back to Fairbanks and work out all the details. Miguel's going to be released from the hospital. We've got to get down to the police department and file our report of what happened at the crash site. And we have to figure out what to do about Rachel's school." Rachel glanced up from her cocoa. "How am I going to do that? Go to school?" Jack replied to her, "Well, Rachel, tell me what you think of this." Rachel leaned in close, listening intently. "See, the way I see it, you have three choices. We could hire a tutor and let you continue your classes right here at home. Or you could attend school here in Circle, but it's a small school, only 20 students and 2 teachers for the entire pre-K through 12th grades, all in one building. The third option is to have you stay at your home in Fairbanks, and either we'll stay there with you during the week, or we'll hire someone to stay there while you attend classes. Then you can come home on the weekends. Sasha and I want you to be comfortable with your decision, so I want you to think about it pretty hard. We'd love to have you here with us, but we also realize that it's awfully isolated out here, and we just don't want to take you away from your friends. And don't you think you can't change your mind later? If you want to try homeschooling for a while, then decide you don't like it, or if you just miss your friends, you can always go back to your school in Fairbanks." Rachel stared into her cup of hot cocoa. It was a lot to take in. Life would never be the same, and she knew that from now on, she had to make decisions for herself rather than having her parents making those decisions for her. Jack walked over and put his hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to make the decision now. Like I said, we've got the weekend to relax. We'll drive into Fairbanks on Monday, take care of all the details. Miguel's going to be darn sick of that hospital food," he laughed. Jack noticed the way Rachel's eyes lit up at the mention of Miguel. Through all the pain and the horror they had endured, she had found purpose in looking after him. It had given her something to hold on to, something to focus on besides her own grief. "Why, he's going to be okay," Jack assured her. "Doctors, they just want to keep him a little longer to make sure everything's healing right." Rachel nodded, and her fingers tightening around her coffee mug. "I know," she said, "but I'm still worried about him." "Well, we'll go first thing Monday morning," Sasha promised, exchanging a glance with Jack. They all knew that Rachel had latched onto Miguel in a way that was more than just gratitude. He had become the big brother she'd always longed for. Jack leaned forward, rubbing a hand over his face. "That Mavka's bandage probably sped up his healing more than the doctors even realize," he said. "But 4 broken ribs and a punctured lung aren't something you just bounce right back from overnight." Rachel swallowed hard. I hated leaving him there alone. Grizzly, who had been leaning against the counter with a beer in his hand, gave her a reassuring nod. Why, he's not alone, kid. Carl's been checking in on him. You can bet he's already given the nurses a hard time. That made Rachel smile. She let herself settle into the warmth of the room, surrounded by people who had become her family. Miguel stared at the ceiling of his hospital room, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor, the occasional shuffle of nurses outside his door. God, he hated hospitals. The sterile smell, the white walls, the way time seemed to slow to a crawl. He felt trapped. The doctors said he was healing well, surprisingly well, but they still insisted on keeping him over the weekend for observation. He'd argued it at first, but the sharp ache in his ribs reminded him that maybe they had a point. He sighed, shifting carefully in the bed. Every movement sent a dull throb through his side, a reminder of how close he had come to not making it out of that crash. But the pain wasn't what was bothering him the most. It was the dreams. Every time he drifted off, he found himself back in the frozen wilderness, standing at the edge of the trees, the wind whispering through the branches. And she was there, the Mavka, watching him with those eerie, luminous eyes. In the dreams, she never spoke. She only looked at him, her long dark hair shifting like shadows in the wind. Sometimes she reached out, her fingers grazing the air between them. And every time he woke up just before she could touch him. He didn't know what it meant. Was she calling him back? Or just checking on him? Miguel ran a hand over his chest where the doctors had removed the strange bandage. They had marveled at how quickly his wounds were closing and the rib bones were mending, chalking it up to a remarkable healing response. He knew better. A knock at the door startled him, and a nurse poked her head in. She can't sleep? Miguel shook his head. Well, not really. She smiled sympathetically. Well, I can bring you something to help if you need it. Nah, he said quickly. I'll be fine. The nurse gave him a questioning look, but didn't push. Well, if you need anything, you just hit the call button. As she left, Miguel exhaled, staring at the dim light coming from the hallway. The steady beep of the heart monitor and the soft shuffle of nurses' footsteps down the corridor were the only sounds filling the sterile quiet of the hospital room. He didn't want to sleep, not yet, because deep down he knew if he closed his eyes, she'd be there, waiting for him again. Now he was grateful that the Mavka had saved his life, but at what cost? Did she save him only to demand that he now live in her world? He swallowed hard, the weight of exhaustion pulling at him. His body craved rest, but his mind rebelled, because every time he drifted off, he found himself back there, in that place of shadows and whispers, a world between the worlds, a realm not entirely here, yet not completely gone. Monday morning, Rosa made her famous huevos rancheros, the scent of simmering tomatoes and roasted chilies, and freshly made tortillas filled the kitchen as Rosa worked over the stove, humming softly to herself. The rich aroma made its way through the house, drawing everyone to the table. Secret's in the sauce, Rosa said with a wink, carefully ladling the thick, spicy mixture over a pair of perfectly cooked eggs perched on a crisp tortilla. She sprinkled on a crumble of queso fresco, a handful of chopped cilantro, and placed the plate in front of Rachel. Eat up, mija. You'll need your strength if you're going to town today. Rachel hesitated for only a second before picking up her fork. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until that very moment. This is, she started, swallowing quickly so she could take another bite. This is the best thing I've ever tasted. Rosa chuckled, pleased of course. Good food makes everything better, no? Rachel nodded enthusiastically, suddenly feeling lighter. It was the first morning since the crash that she wasn't overwhelmed by grief. And sitting at this table, surrounded by people who had taken her in without hesitation, she felt, if not happy, then at least like she belonged. It was a beautiful morning, sunny and bright. The morning air was crisp, but carried the promise of spring, and the sun casting long golden streaks across the horizon. The snow-covered ground sparkled, and for the first time since the crash, Rachel felt a little lighter. Maybe it was the good breakfast, or maybe it was just knowing that today wasn't all about survival. Today was about moving forward. She sat in the back seat of Jack's truck as they pulled onto the road, heading towards Fairbanks Memorial Hospital. Rachel was anxious to see Miguel. She hadn't stopped worrying about him since they'd been rescued. And in those awful days on the mountains, he had been her anchor. Someone to focus on besides her own grief and pain and the loss of her parents. Now she just wanted to see for herself that he was okay. You see that little building right over there? Sasha asked her. That is the Erla Hutchinson School. Now Rachel glanced over at the small building, about the size of a small shed. Rachel had told them at breakfast that she had decided to attend the small school in Circle. She liked the idea of such a small student body. It'll be easy for me to be the number one top student. You see, if I'm the only one in my grade, she giggled. Jack laughed at her. Well, that's a good way to look at it. I just don't want people to look at me like I'm broken. You know how mean kids can be, whispering behind your back. That's the girl who lost her parents. And all the teachers feeling sorry for her. Well, I just want to put it all behind me. Just start over. Sasha glanced over at her. You are definitely not broken, Rachel. You've been through a lot, but you're still standing. You're an incredibly strong young woman. Rachel didn't reply, but Sasha's words settled in her chest like a warm hug. Well, as Jack pulled into the hospital parking lot, Rachel felt her stomach tighten with anticipation. The sprawling white building loomed ahead, its sterile walls a sharp contrast to the wild beauty of the mountains that she'd been stranded on. A part of her still felt like she was in survival mode, waiting for the next disaster to strike. But this wasn't the mountain. This was safety. Jack parked near the entrance and they made their way inside. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee, and the hum of soft conversations and beeping machines filled the air. Rachel followed Sasha down the hall, her hands balled into fists. Now Miguel's room was near the end of the corridor, and when Sasha knocked and pushed the door open, Rachel let out a breath she hadn't realized that she was holding. She ran to Miguel's side and gave him a hug. Miguel was propped up in bed, looking pale but alert. His ribs were bandaged beneath his hospital gown, and an IV dripped a fluid into his arm. But when he saw them, his face lit up with a grin. About time you guys showed up, he joked, though his voice was hoarse. I was starting to think I'd have to break myself out. Jack laughed. Are you ready to get out of here? I was ready the second they made me put on this hospital gown. Miguel winced as he shifted in bed. But the doctor has to clear me first. Should be soon. Rachel pulled up a chair, watching him closely. How are you really feeling? Miguel hesitated, his fingers tapping against the blanket. Like I got trampled by a moose. Rachel giggled. Or was it in a plane crash? Everyone laughed. The seriousness of the situation seemed lighter now that everyone was safe. A knock at the door interrupted them. A doctor stepped inside, clipboard in hand. Good news, Miguel. You're officially cleared to go home. Perfect timing, Miguel muttered, throwing the blanket off and swinging his legs over the side of the bed. He grimaced, but forced himself to stand. Hold on there, the doctor said. We've got to get that IV out of your arm and get you some clothes." As they gathered his things and helped him out of the hospital, Rachel felt something shift inside her. They were moving forward, little by little. As the truck rumbled down the street towards the Fairbanks Police Department, Rachel's stomach tightened into a knot. She was glad Miguel was out of the hospital, but the next part of the day loomed over her like a dark cloud. She was glad she didn't have to give her statement. Reliving the crash, that wasn't something she wanted to do anytime soon. But she was not looking forward to going back to her house either. Packing up her things and facing the ghosts of what had happened to her parents would be difficult. So she stared out the window, watching the buildings blur by. She had lived in Fairbanks her whole life, yet it felt different now. Everything had changed. Well, they got to the police station, and Jack walked around to help Miguel out. "We won't be long," he told Sasha, handing her the keys. He reached over and put his hand on Rachel's arm. "You'll be okay, kid." She hugged him, then climbed into the passenger seat. Sasha nodded. "Rachel, how about we go to the school first?" Rachel swallowed hard. Here we go. The Fairbanks High School office was quiet when they stepped inside. A receptionist looked up from her desk, offering a polite smile. "Hi, I'm here to pick up my transcripts," Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman nodded and typed something into her computer. "Name?" "Rachel Carter." A pause. The receptionist's expression flickered with something. Recognition? Pity? Rachel shifted uncomfortably as a woman retrieved a folder and handed it over to her. "There you go, sweetheart. If you need anything else, you just let us know." With a forced smile, Rachel thanked her. Sasha put an arm around her shoulder as they walked back to the truck. "Are you okay?" Rachel exhaled shakily. "Yeah, I'm glad she didn't say anything back there. I don't think I could have held it together." Sasha nodded at that. "Honey, you don't need to hold it together. Let's go get your things." Rachel's house sat on a quiet street, surrounded by snow-laden trees. The moment that Sasha pulled into the driveway, tears filled Rachel's eyes. It looked exactly the same, except for the emptiness. She hesitated at the door, her fingers hovering over the handle. She had walked through this doorway 1,000 times, but now it felt foreign. And taking a deep breath, she unlocked the door and stepped inside. The silence was deafening. Dust motes floated in the morning light filtering through the window. Everything was just as they had left it. The couch where her mother used to sit and crochet. The bookshelf that her father had built. She expected to hear her mom call from the kitchen. "Is that you, honey?" Her eyes burned as she stepped deeper inside. She moved on autopilot, heading to her bedroom. Grabbing a duffel bag, she started stuffing clothes inside as quickly as she could. Sasha lingered in the doorway, watching quietly. Rachel's gaze landed on a framed photo on her nightstand. Her and her parents, smiling, all together on a summer camping trip. Her hands trembled as she picked it up and placed the photo gently in her bag. When she turned, Sasha gave her a soft smile. "Are you ready?" Rachel took one last look around the room, the home that no longer felt like home, before nodding. "Yeah, let's go." As they stepped outside, Rachel squared her shoulders against the weight of grief. This was a new beginning, a painful one, but a beginning nonetheless. Meanwhile, at the Fairbanks Police Department, Jack and Miguel sat across from Officer Grayson in a small conference room. Jack leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, while Miguel sat stiffly, trying to find a comfortable position for his sore ribs. Officer Grayson, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a tired expression, flipped open a notepad and clicked his pen. He glanced at the tape recorder on the table before pressing the record button. All right, gentlemen, let's start from the beginning. Walk me through what happened on that flight. Jack looked over at Miguel and then turned back and nodded. When we landed in Anchorage, a flight attendant told us all flights had been grounded due to the storm. The winds were hitting 60 miles an hour. No commercial flights were available. Then we were told that Sam Anderson would be making the flight in his Beechcraft. A handful of us were going to fly with him to Fairbanks. How many passengers? The officer interrupted. Well, I believe there were 16 of us, plus the pilot. Sam wanted to wait till the evening when the conditions had calmed. So we left Anchorage at like 6:30, I think. He looked at Miguel, who nodded his head in agreement. There was quite a geomagnetic storm that night. Northern lights mixed with some lightning. We had hit a pocket of turbulence that shook the plane pretty hard. But old Sam seemed to have a handle on things. And then something seemed to hit the plane, and we experienced a sudden loss in altitude. Grayson frowned, jotting down some notes. Any warning before the crash? Miguel shook his head. No, not really. 1 second we were trying to stabilize, and the next we were going down. I don't know if it was weather-related, or equipment failure, or something else. But whatever happened, the plane went down fast. And Jack added to that, we heard Sam yelling, Mayday, and trying to reach someone on the radio. I heard him yell something like, we've lost navigation. That was it. We were spinning into a nosedive straight towards the mountain. And when you crashed? The officer asked him. Jack inhaled sharply, the memory of twisted metal and blood flashing through his mind. It was chaos. The plane broke apart, the cockpit hit first, and I don't know what kept us from flipping upside down, but instead we seemed to skid through the snow. One wing was torn off completely, and the other one was broken in two. His jaw clenched. Miguel and I got out of our seats as fast as we could and tried to help the survivors. It was freezing, and we had to move fast. We checked each passenger, and we pulled the dead ones out onto the snow while doing what we could to help the injured. Grayson nodded at him, flipping to another page in his notebook. Now, you were out there for several days. How'd you survive? Miguel shifted uncomfortably. I was injured pretty badly. Jack had to scavenge what he could from the wreckage to secure the cabin so we wouldn't freeze to death. Rachel, one of the passengers, the youngest on the plane, looked through everyone's bag to find coats and sweaters and anything that would help. And she found a little bit of food. Grayson tapped his pen against the paper. Yeah, there's something I need to ask you. Over the weekend, we sent search teams to the site to assess the wreckage. We found some interesting tracks at the crash site. Large tracks, unusual tracks. And he leaned forward just slightly. Can you explain that? Jack's eyes flickered with something unreadable. He knew exactly what Grayson was referring to. The tracks that didn't belong to any ordinary animal. Miguel hesitated. There were things out there, he said carefully. Predators. Predators? Grayson repeated, raising an eyebrow. Wolves? Jack exhaled. Yeah, there were some wolves. Grayson removed his glasses, rubbed his eyes, put them back on his face. Took a deep breath, pursed his lips together, and then said, Okay then, what can you tell me about the piles of firewood and the large piece of Alaskan Airlines tail section that was leaning up against the crash site? Miguel glanced over at Jack. He'd been nearly unconscious the last couple of days and didn't know anything about the mysterious creature that had brought wood and dragged that piece of metal up to the site, providing the aircraft cabin with shelter from the wind and a large bright surface to reflect the sun's rays, essentially leading to the rescue. Jack hesitated for a moment. Then he slowly answered. Officer Grayson, I can't explain everything that happened out there on that mountain. God works in mysterious ways. Grayson studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. Here's what I can tell you. The investigation into the crash is ongoing. The official cause hasn't been determined yet, but there are a few theories, like combination of pilot error, mechanical failure, weather interference. What's strange is that the black box, which is actually bright orange, by the way, which contains the FDR, that's the flight data recorder, and the CVR, the cockpit voice recorder, well, that's missing. On this plane, it was installed in the tail section, which is usually considered the most survivable part of the aircraft. Now, it could be buried under the snow, but until we find that box, we're missing a lot of critical information. Jack frowned at this. Was it just his imagination, or did this officer have an accusatory tone in his voice? And Grayson continued on. Without that box, we don't know why this plane lost contact. But meanwhile, we're bringing in recovery teams to retrieve the bodies, gather more evidence. If you remember anything else, anything at all, you let us know. Jack nodded, standing up. We'll do that, officer. And as he was leaving the room, Jack turned back towards Grayson. Say, maybe you can help me with something. One of the passengers, the young girl, Rachel, well, she's only 14 years old, and both of her parents were killed in the wreck, and she has no one else, no other family. We asked her if she wanted to live with us, my wife and I, and she agreed. So who do we need to talk to make this official? We'd like to provide a home for her and make sure that she gets the care that she needs. Officer Grayson tore a sheet of paper from his notepad, wrote down a name and a number, then handed it to Jack. You call this number and you ask for Dana Grayson. See, that's my wife. She works for the Child Protective Services, and she'll know who to send you to and what steps you have to take. Now, it's likely that the girl will need some counseling, and they're going to want to do a site visit. Understood. Thank you, Jack said, shaking Grayson's hand. You've been a big help. As they left the station, Miguel exhaled. Something doesn't add up, Jack. Jack tightened his jaw. I guess I better tell you what really happened up there. Below the crash site, hidden beneath a canopy of towering pines, the Bigfoot watched from his shelter in the trees. His massive fur-covered form blended into the shadows as he crouched low. Keen eyes fixed on the search team scouring the wreckage. They would find nothing useful anyway, because the most valuable piece of their puzzle had already been taken. Turning silently, the creature began the long trek back to his cave, a place where no man had ever stepped and lived to tell about it. The entrance was nearly invisible, masked off by boulders and overgrown roots, but the Bigfoot knew the path well. And ducking inside, he entered a vast chamber, where the scent of earth and time lingered thick in the air. This was his sanctuary, his hoard, a collection spanning decades, perhaps longer. Scattered across the cavern floor were the relics of human tragedy. Twisted metal fragments, broken dials and switches, remnants of tattered seats, suitcases, their contents long since plundered, lay stacked against the wall. Rusting watches, some still frozen at the moment of impact, were piled in a corner like forgotten trinkets. Tarnished wedding bands, their engravings worn smooth by time, rested in a small alcove, kept separate, as if their significance had been understood. In the dim glow of scattered shafts of light filtering through cracks in the rocks, another pile gleamed. Shattered pieces of aircraft windows, reflecting like jagged diamonds. And then, at the very center of it all, lay his newest treasure. A bright orange box, its surface scratched and dented, but still intact. The Bigfoot's massive fingers brushed over the markings on its side, though he could not read the words. It was different from the other things he had collected. He shook it, held it to his ear, shook it again. With a deep, rumbling breath, the Bigfoot picked up that orange box and carried it deeper into the cave. where no light would ever touch it again.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode, and I hope you'll join us next week for another installment of the Wolfman Chronicles. And until then, have a great week, everyone.
Hey folks, Clay Steele here. You know, I spend a lot of time outdoors around this here campfire. If you're like me, you get downright annoyed by all those pesky mosquitoes buzzing around. They're just looking for a free meal. Nothing ruins a good night under the stars faster than slapping and scratching at bites. And that's why I keep the bee itch stop. I keep it handy. One swipe and that itch is gone. No more burning, no more scratching, just good old relief. Made right here in Nevada with all natural ingredients. It's safe for the whole family. So if you're tired of being a mosquito buffet, do yourself a favor and get you some bee itch stop today. And this is Clay Steele. Watch out for them bugs.